By around 5 a.m. on January 3, 2023, most residents of the building on Polina Osipenko Street in Moscow were still inside their apartments when sudden screams shattered the calm of the hallway. The sounds were sharp, unmistakable. Neighbors immediately realized this was not an ordinary domestic argument. The first responders didn't arrive as quickly as the occupants had expected. When the officers finally reached the correct floor, the door to the apartment remained locked, and no one answered any knocks. A tense silence fell over the landing, though only moments before the sound of a struggle had been heard. An emergency rescue service was called. Only after the lock was forced open did they gain entry, and what met them inside pointed clearly to a grave crime. Bloodstains on the floor, the bathroom door smashed in, a scene of chaos that seemed like a desperate attempt to escape. In the room, the officers found a man covered in blood, and nearby lay a woman's body showing no signs of life. In my view, the reaction of the individual detained at the moment the police entered is one of the key details, but its full significance will become clear later. For now, the main question on everyone's mind in the stairwell remained open. Who was this woman, and what could possibly have happened in that Moscow flat in the early hours of the new year? At that moment, only one thing was known. The event had involved too much aggression to be explained away easily. The story was just beginning. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's story, I just want to ask you to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment down below. I put a lot of effort into bringing you real, true crime cases from all around the world, only authentic stories here. Your support really helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate any interaction. After the body was discovered in the Moscow apartment, investigators determined the deceased was Anna Azovskaya, born in 1988 in Vologda, Russia. To grasp the scale of the tragedy, we need to look at her life story. Anna grew up in a family of educators. Her father, Vasily Sablin, held a doctorate in history and worked at a university focused on regional history. Her mother was also connected to the education sector. In their home, there was always order, discipline, and high expectations for their children. Even in school, Anna carried herself confidently on stage. She sang, participated in productions, and eagerly took on hosting roles at school events. Classmates noted she had a talent for commanding an audience. I believe it was precisely this ability that explains why her path into the media world was not accidental, but a logical extension of her early talents. Unlike many of her peers, Anna knew early on what she wanted to do. Her goal was to work in radio, and only in radio. So in 2006, she enrolled to study journalism at Vologda State University. In her very first year, she secured an internship at Russian Radio Vologda, where she quickly stood out. Her voice was appreciated almost immediately, and the station management offered her to host on-air shows alongside her studies. It was around this time she adopted the on-air pseudonym Azovskaya, a short, catchy name that stuck with listeners. By 2011, the year she graduated, Anna had become a familiar voice throughout Vologda. People listened to her daily, in their cars, in offices, and at home. Her professional rise was both rapid and well-earned. By the time Anna had established herself as a staple on Vologda radio, someone entered her life who would define the next chapter. In 2009, she met Vasily Solovyov, a businessman from Cherepovets who managed several companies, including the station where Anna was broadcasting. He was nearing 40, ran a stable business, and had a calm, results-driven demeanor that colleagues often noted. Their connection began through work, but gradually turned into something deeper. Vasily didn't just avoid standing in the way of her professional goals. He actively supported them. Over time, he made some major gestures. He gifted her a car, arranged an apartment for her in Moscow on Polina Osipenko Street, and helped her with housing in both Cherepovets and Vologda. These weren't just lavish gifts. They were clear signs of his vision for a shared future. Despite the age difference, their bond was steady. They kept their relationship private and didn't speak about it outside a close circle. Friends emphasized this wasn't a one-sided situation. It wasn't the usual story of a wealthy older man and a young media personality. It was a partnership, and Anna continued to drive her own projects, never relying solely on Vasily's financial help. This lasted for over a decade. By the early 2020s, both of them were openly considering a future together. But in 2021, everything changed abruptly. Vasily became severely ill with COVID-19. He was placed on a ventilator, but sadly passed away in June of that year at the age of 51. For Anna, the loss was devastating. She became noticeably more reserved. She stopped sharing her plans, and her co-workers observed that the inner strength she once radiated was gone. This marked the beginning of a period where her emotional resilience started to erode, and that would become a critical factor in what happened next. After Vasily's passing, Anna remained on air, but only fulfilled what her position required. The job no longer brought her the same joy. It turned into a routine obligation, something she simply had to do. She also withdrew from her social circles. She stopped meeting friends, even avoided short conversations, which now seemed exhausting. Co-workers noticed that she rarely smiled and dodged any questions about her personal life. In moments like these, people often find themselves isolated with their emotions, and that isolation can create the kind of vulnerability that gives unusual connections unexpected significance. And here's the important point. Emotional instability often leaves someone more open to those who offer them attention or support. Throughout 2022, Anna's condition never truly stabilized. Outwardly, she appeared composed, mostly for the sake of work, but underneath, she was enduring a long stretch of emotional exhaustion. The balance that Vasily once provided was gone, and there was nothing to replace it. Her world shrank down to daily tasks, infrequent trips outside, and minimal social interaction. It was a period where Anna deeply needed someone to lean on, but she didn't know how to express it. That kind of inner emptiness often creates space for new connections, ones that don't feel like a threat, but instead appear as a chance to return to something resembling normal life. And this drawn-out emotional crisis became the backdrop for a new relationship that would later define the course of events. By late 2022, someone new had entered Anna's life, a man who, at first glance, seemed to have no real connection to her. Vladimir Maklakov, 33 years old and originally from the Vologda region, was the son of an old acquaintance of Vasily Solovyov. His family owned a sizable logging business, and while Vladimir was listed as the company's CEO, it was widely understood that his father handled the actual operations. Locals described him as someone used to doing whatever he pleased, with little concern for consequences. His lifestyle couldn't have been more different from what Anna was used to. He was known to drink regularly, and some accounts described aggressive outbursts. Conversations with people who had known him longer often brought up arguments, broken relationships, and suggestions of possible use of restricted substances. A few of his former acquaintances confirmed that his marriage fell apart within a few months, and his next relationship ended when the woman left, taking her son with her. These patterns seem to speak not just to impulsive behavior, but to a deeply ingrained way of living. Against that background, Anna stood in stark contrast, structured, focused on her work, someone who disliked disorder. But according to those who later observed their dynamic, it was exactly this contrast that allowed him to quickly get close to her. His approach was all about intense attention, gifts, compliments, promises of support. For someone grieving a deep loss, that kind of presence can feel like a path back to stability. At that point, Anna was in emotional decline, and her vulnerability gave Vladimir a way into her life. Yet she never spoke openly about their connection. She kept it private, whether due to her reserved nature or perhaps an awareness that the relationship might raise concerns. Still, this was the moment when a romantic bond began to take shape, one that would soon become the center of a tragedy. Their relationship unfolded away from public view, and that secrecy allowed many troubling signs to go unnoticed until the situation spiraled out of control. After several months together, Vladimir's troubling behavior started to surface more clearly. When under the influence, he became loud and emotionally reactive. He could snap over minor things, and those who had known him for years said these outbursts were nothing new. Anna didn't speak openly about these conflicts, but one of her close friends later recalled subtle hints that something wasn't right. Anna mentioned being exhausted from constant tension, avoided giving details, and often changed the subject quickly. These indirect signs suggested the relationship had lost its sense of peace. At the same time, details about Vladimir's past were available to those who had crossed paths with him before. His first marriage lasted just a few months. Later, a woman left with her son, unable to endure the emotional highs and lows. These stories painted a portrait of someone whose behavior could be difficult to predict. Naturally, this raises the question, why didn't this pattern of events serve as a clear warning for Anna? Their relationship followed a recurring cycle. A phase of intense attention and promises would shift into arguments and emotional outbursts. Afterward, Vladimir would apologize, insisting he could change. He would return to being overly attentive, almost as if trying to make up for his prior behavior. This back and forth created a sense of instability, but at the same time, it gave hope that things might eventually get better. During this period, Anna was in desperate need of emotional support. Any display of care felt like a chance to regain a lost sense of security. That's why she continued to stay close to someone whose actions were unpredictable, but who, in her eyes, also offered compassion when it mattered most. This is how the dynamics of their relationship began to take shape. A dynamic where the real red flags were increasingly pushed to the background. By the end of December 2022, Anna and Vladimir had already gone through multiple tense periods. Still, they decided to ring in the new year together. For Anna, this likely felt like a chance to reset, to find peace in the start of 2023. They traveled to Moscow and stayed at the apartment on Polina Osipenko Street, the same apartment Vasily Solovyov had once gifted to Anna. Vladimir would later tell investigators they had rented the place, though this wasn't true. Was that lie an attempt to downplay his real position in the relationship? From late December through January 2nd, their days passed without any outward signs of conflict. They went for walks, visited cafes, and even took photos together. One particularly telling moment was a professional photo session on January 2nd. The photographer who worked with them that day recalled that the couple seemed relaxed, comfortable, and showed no visible tension. In the pictures, they looked like any other couple spending the holidays together, festive, composed, and unaware of what was coming. That day would be Anna's last. After the photo shoot, they returned to the apartment to spend the evening together. Everything on the surface looked like a typical holiday scene. Winter break in Moscow, downtime, and a quiet night for a couple to unwind or talk about the future. But what happened in the following hours would reveal that the outward calm had been masking something far more troubling. What could have been the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship instead became the prelude to the most devastating part of this story. The mood inside the apartment was peaceful on the surface. Dinner, casual conversation, and talk about plans for the coming weeks. But at some point that evening, the conversation turned toward their future, a subject that had been quietly lingering for some time. For Vladimir, that talk became a test of where he stood, and he chose to push the situation into the open. He proposed, suddenly, without any prior discussion. For Vladimir, it was a move meant to cement their relationship, a way to show he was in control. But Anna saw it differently. She responded calmly, without hostility, and said no. She explained that she wasn't ready to commit her life to someone whose behavior was so unstable. There was no shouting, no argument, no emotional outburst. And that, the quiet, composed refusal, became the turning point. Still, there are moments here that raise questions. Could he have interpreted her calm as emotional detachment, the kind of distance he feared most? To Maklakov, her rejection wasn't just a disagreement. It struck him as a personal insult, a betrayal. According to investigators, he had been drinking that evening, which may have heightened his sensitivity to even the slightest sign of resistance. The conversation quickly escalated. His voice grew louder, his tone more forceful, until suddenly there was a burst of aggression. What could have ended as an uncomfortable, disappointing moment instead turned into something far more dangerous. Inside that apartment, a situation erupted, one that would end in tragedy. The escalation happened fast, right after things turned physical. Based on the investigation, Vladimir's tone shifted drastically. He moved toward Anna, blocking her path and preventing her from leaving the room. She tried to avoid a confrontation and headed toward the bathroom, the only place where she could shut a door and create any kind of barrier. She managed to slam it shut, but it wasn't built for protection, and the lock couldn't hold under pressure. It took only seconds to break the door open. That moment marked the beginning of a 3-minute span that forensic experts would later reconstruct in chilling detail. The medical examiner's report documented 247 stab wounds. The numbers speak for themselves, highlighting the frenzied and chaotic nature of the assault. The report emphasized that there were no pauses, a clear sign of extreme emotional disturbance at the time of the attack. It's important to note how quickly everything unfolded. The timeline laid out by the forensic team underscores just how rapidly the situation deteriorated. During those moments, neighbors began hearing noise, dull thuds at first, followed by sharp cries that quickly gave way to muffled sounds of a struggle. Several people in the building called emergency services at nearly the same time, reporting signs of a violent altercation. However, records later revealed that the response time was longer than expected for such an urgent call. That delay would become a matter of serious scrutiny during the investigation. When officers arrived on the scene, the apartment door was locked. They had to force entry. Inside, they found Vladimir Maklakov next to Anna's body. He was visibly intoxicated, with bloodstains on his clothing. According to the officers, Maklakov didn't resist arrest and spoke incoherently. His first words were included in the official report. He said, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." His behavior was erratic, switching between scattered attempts at explaining himself and total emotional detachment. At that point, the basic structure of the case became clear to investigators. The scene, the weapon, and the suspect found on site. But questions still remained about how the events unfolded, how long it took for emergency responders to arrive, and the degree to which alcohol had influenced the situation. This moment would become central to reconstructing the events of that night and would guide the course of the investigation. News of Anna's death quickly spread between the two cities where her voice was instantly recognizable, Vologda and Moscow. Her colleagues in radio were stunned. Many highlighted her dedication and professionalism, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the shocking circumstances of her death. National media outlets, including a program hosted by Andrei Malakov, discussed her personality, the challenges she faced after losing Solovyov, and the emotional pressure she'd been under. Speculations about motive surfaced, ranging from a domestic argument to theories involving the inheritance from her former partner. These were floated as hypotheses, not as definitive claims. Anna's family suddenly found themselves in the public eye, adding another layer of hardship to their grief. What troubled me was how the public conversation often shifted away from facts and veered into speculation. It became clear that separating verified information from assumptions was going to be critical. The trial began with a confession. Maklakov admitted to the attack right away, but tried to frame it as a result of emotional breakdown, hoping to lessen the consequences. The charges included 2 main counts: inflicting severe bodily harm resulting in death, and unlawful entry into a residence followed by aggressive behavior. These charges reflected the sequence of events documented in the investigation. During the court proceedings, Maklakov's demeanor was noticeably different from what officers had recorded on the night of the incident. He spoke in a composed manner, emphasized remorse, and claimed to have acted under extreme emotional distress. His attorney focused on his voluntary confession and the fact that he never attempted to flee, trying to convince the court that this warranted a lighter sentence. The defense also presented character references from his hometown and records of past treatment for dependency issues, all positioned as part of their legal strategy. It's worth noting that the defense's approach essentially relied on portraying the incident as a moment of lost control, a narrative that seemed aimed at softening the public's perception of what was, at its core, a deeply disturbing crime. The court took into account the nature of the attack, its duration, and the conclusions presented by forensic experts. Vladimir Maklakov was sentenced to 14 years in a high-security facility. For Anna's family, the decision brought mixed emotions. On one hand, the punishment was significant. On the other, the gravity of what had happened made it hard to feel that the sentence truly reflected the depth of their loss. Anna's parents filed a civil lawsuit seeking 5 million rubles in damages. The compensation was less about money and more about formal recognition of responsibility. Against the backdrop of their firm stance, Maklakov's attempts to portray himself as someone pushed to the edge by circumstance felt like efforts to avoid full accountability. That court decision marked the official end of the legal proceedings, but it left many questions unanswered. Questions about how a series of decisions and overlooked warning signs could lead to a tragedy that, in many ways, seemed preventable. After sentencing, Maklakov's future appeared to be clear-cut. Years of isolation under a strict regime with little hope for leniency. But shortly afterward, his attorney filed a petition for him to participate in a military deployment as part of a special operations contract, a legal mechanism that allows inmates to substitute most of their sentence with service. The petition was approved, and Vladimir joined a group selected for expedited training before being deployed. His participation in that program became grounds for early release, and in 2025, just 2 years later, he returned home. The news of his early release shocked many in Vologda. Residents still remembered the details of the crime and didn't expect someone responsible for such a serious act to be walking free so soon. In my view, the speed of these developments was jarring, especially for those who believed justice meant serving the full term. Upon his return, he settled near his family. According to those familiar with him, he started helping his father with chores and made a point to avoid public places, especially those where he might be recognized. Not long after, rumors began circulating that he had started a new relationship. That news quickly spread, triggering a fresh wave of public discussion. The contrast between his quiet daily life and the enduring grief of Anna's family couldn't have been more stark. There are no public records of his employment, Open sources offer no indication of whether he plans to continue his contract service or relocate. What's known is that he now keeps a low profile and avoids any involvement in public discourse related to the case. Formally, he isn't under any specific restrictions, except for the requirement to remain registered at his official place of residence during designated periods. For Anna's mother, the news of his release was especially painful. She couldn't fathom how someone who had taken her daughter's life was now free. The difference between the court sentence and the actual time served sparked strong public reaction. Many questioned whether the current system aligns with society's expectations for accountability in cases of this magnitude. And so, the story entered its final phase, where the legal outcome became just one piece of a much larger picture, and questions of fairness, justice, and the meaning of consequence gained a far more painful and deeply personal resonance.